encourage you to apply and encourage your friends to apply. And that will be exciting. So let's go through it. I don't have a way of advancing the thing. Let me see if I can. Can you do it? Andrew, thanks. And if not, we can wing it, but there are some really good images.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. So it is a, yeah, I'll do the overview and then I'm going to turn it over to Olivia shortly. So it's a 3-semester opportunity, meaning it really starts in the 2nd semester of your junior year, although if you've just become a junior, it's all good. You have to be a junior to have this fellowship. You no longer have to be only a Stanford major, because it was just last year only for, that's how it was originally conceived, and we realized that that's not fair. There are lots of good political engagement projects outside of this great policy school. So it's open to junior students of all backgrounds. It is a fellowship in which we've met the donor, awesome human being, whose vision is that it's really a critique of politics, which is that politics, she grew up in Texas, and she was a kind of frustrated activist, I would say in a way, because it excluded many women and many people of color in her life. So she wanted a fellowship that would encourage, mentor, build political leadership for a better, more representative democracy. It's not a fellowship that's limited to women or people of color, minority, but the spirit of the fellowship is inclusivity and how do we improve access and to make democracy a better conversation than it has been. So I would say that's the spirit of the program, and there is our fabulous Professor Deandra Rose, who's also part of the PEP history. So I would say that's the other thing that's not really mentioned here is that PEP is a collaboration between the Heart Leadership Program and POLIS. So what we are handling in Heart is the class part, which is the junior year. There was a colloquium of sorts of the PEP fellows who come together. That's in the spring. It's a course called the Democracy Lab. And if you wanted to advance the slide, I don't know if it's there. Yes, so it's the Gateway course, which is in this spring, PPS 564. It's a higher number because of it actually does sometimes have MPP students in there, which makes it a really interesting mix. Students get $3,000 for their summer internship or thesis support. There's the political engagement project that you create is what the money is for. It is above and beyond, this is really important, above and beyond other types of funding you may get. So it is really meant to free you to ask and pursue the project of your desire and design, and not be, having to kind of squeeze it into some of the necessities that I knew actually do define life as an undergrad. It could be for a project that is amplifying your senior thesis. It could be its own research project. It could be a summer internship. Some people did none of the above and just had their own project, and they used the money to, in effect, to do something that no one was doing. Then I'm going to let Olivia talk about what her cohort has really done. It is such an amazing cohort. I have to say, this group is just really a super inspiring group of young people. And then the fourth part is that there are events and workshops throughout the year and senior year. So you have the project you're going to be thinking about is something that you should think about. You'll have the spring semester to really develop it and hone it, which is similar to Soul that you may have just heard about. But then you have a kind of year, you have the summer and the following year to implement and put it to work, and also to rethink it. So if you decide, as is often the case, is, well, that's not working, people are not responding the way I thought, or more likely, every original project was interesting. What happened was, oh, this is what's really exciting to me. Then we pursue that. We want, so it is student-led, and I should say the last thing I'll say about this program, this particular fellowship, it is new, and we are figuring it out, and we welcome your vision and entrepreneurial sort of capacity to help make it what it can be. So the spirit of it is to create an on-ramp to a life of political engagement. could be elected office, fine. That's not really the purpose. It's also, how do you make a difference politically? How can we build sustainable political change that this world so desperately needs? The crises are screaming in every direction. Whether you think it's partisanship, whether you think it's climate change, whether it's systemic racism, injustices left and right. And the parties only imperfectly deal with them in this country. We need incredible creativity, we need student leadership to figure out how to engage those questions. And so with that point, I'm going to hand it over to Olivia Renaud.
Oh, Lord, okay. Hi, everybody. Like Professor Peck said, I'm Olivia. I was a member of the last class of PEP Fellows. I'm now acting as the PEP Program Assistant. So if you become a PEP Fellow, you will likely see me as your TA in the spring iteration of Democracy Lab. Woo!
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about my, can I have the next slide, please? That's perfect, because I took this class. The course is project-based. The goal of the course is just kind of equip you with the tool set that you'll need to go into your PEP summer, working with your community-based organization, doing your internship or whatever you decide to pursue. There's some reading, some reflecting, some discussion. I think our cohort got to test run this model and it ended up being really fruitful. For example, there was a lot of emphasis on narrative in our iteration of Democracy Lab, and then I took that narrative, which I had not necessarily considered before, had not prided myself on being a person who really, yes, narratives are important, but I hadn't thought about them to this degree in this context. Took the notion of narrative, ran with it, now have an additional thesis that is centered on the narrative of land and property ownership. So needless to say, you will be equipped with tools that you did not think you needed that may entirely shift the kind of course of your Duke experience. Lots of collaboration, and then the kind of end goal is to come together and rethink the ways that we interact with democracy and what democracy can be. So excellent class, 10 out of 10 would recommend. And if I can get the next slide, please. So from the class, you will flow into your PEP summer. And in your summer, kind of like I mentioned up here, you can volunteer work, especially heavy emphasis on the ability to volunteer. That summer stipend gives you economic freedom to not have to kind of think about where am I going to live, how am I going to feed myself for the duration of this opportunity, which is something that I highly value because I had a community partner. Essentially, not necessarily my intention to work with them fell through. There were a lack of communication between the two of us essentially led to them, not responding to my emails anymore, which is perfectly fine. They're working on lots of things, but the flexibility of PEP allowed me to pivot into the thesis work that has become my second thesis, in addition to maintaining the relationships that I had developed with some of the people that my work was about. So PEP Fellows will complete a summer project that should be done approximately all summer long. That will be showcased as your kind of deliverable project in the fall. Because my initial intention was to work with a community-based group that's based out of North Carolina with the intent to expand they do a lot of programming about economic and political empowerment in rural Black North Carolina. My intention was to add some educational materials to their tool set that had to do with Black land loss. And though that relationship fell through, relationships that I had made during the course that were in particular with Black farmers that I had met, spoken to through the alternating Sunday Durham Raleigh Black Farmers Market. Does anybody know what that is? It's excellent. The organizers are amazing. I had hordes of people who wanted to and were willing to speak to me. I used my PEP term to develop a kind of social media campaign that I'm hoping will be showcased soon that talked about what Duke students can do to kind of aid in the economic empowerment of Black farmers in the RTP area. A Chronicle article forthcoming. But I think that's just one example of the way that you can kind of take the notions of civic engagement and how to citizen in democracy, and you can run with them and make them your own. And then the flexibility of the program, which allowed me to pivot. So this can seem kind of scary, the idea that you have to commit to doing any of these things to showcase something in the fall, but it's, especially the newness of the program allows you that kind of fluidity to decide what you want your final product to look like after kind of summer's worth of work, and then they give you the resources to showcase that or partner with whoever you want to kind of give that, take the feet that you put on that project and let it run to where it should be. If I can get the next slide, please. Apply. I strongly encourage everyone who is eligible to apply, particularly people who are in disciplines that are not necessarily public policy. I'm public policy history, but if I were just history and doc studies or BMS, I also strongly encourage people who are STEM to apply. Everything that we do is maybe not directly the result of politics, but deeply influenced by politics. I learned that in Professor Rose's class, she's back there. So I would encourage everyone of all disciplines to apply. The applications are due on October 8th. There are 3 parts. It's kind of your typical run-of-the-mill application. I think that's about it.
If you want to say, say one thing. I'll let you answer it as well. So thank you, Olivia. I think the other thing that one of the ways we are rethinking the program in a really exciting way is that how do we best galvanize student collaboration and actually to get students to do democracy work, whatever it is, that respects their individual desires, which in this case, Olivia's fantastic interest in kind of justice and food is so interesting. But also get that to connect to other students' interests. And so one way we're thinking of it is creating this portal, this kind of collective project called How to Citizen. To thinking of citizenship as a verb, not as an entitlement, not as a right, but as something that you, in some ways, make. And that young people's leadership there is what is inspiring and is hopeful about our democracy right now. So part of what we're looking at is each student in the current cohort is going to be, if this works right, will be making their contribution. It's not meant to be a kind of fully coherent guide. So we might want to rework the title, I don't know. But it is meant to be a kind of collective showcase of the stories that people have that brought them into really productive engagement with democracy, so-called. I should also say, this class was extraordinary for their extraordinary candor, their ability to say, democracy as we know it is a travesty. Like, straight up. None of this kind of expectation that what we have right now is in some ways fully realized. It was clear critique, and what they did though was they married critique with aspiration. And that is the essence of what this challenge is at this moment. Putting the critique to work with an aspiration to make it better. So each one of them was piloting something that was like in the best projects. And you so get this, I apologize, you've heard this. But like, yeah, find the treat, find the solution, and what are we going to learn from it? Maybe it's not the thing that's going to make anything better, but like we're going to learn by doing it. And so that's pretty much the essence of it. And we are really open-ended about the senior year projects. One of the things we're thinking about, and maybe you want to talk about this, is how can we create a conversation that gets away from the individualism of look at these 12 great pet fellows, and would be about, let's steer a conversation across the, that is just fun, that is democracy work at its best in an off-election year. What is the question we should be asking? So we're thinking of doing a podcast. We want your help, Sorry, Professor Rose. Well, a collaboration around a podcast competition around a couple themes that we might think about. That would be focused student, and we did the Why Vote competition last year. That was really successful. So we're thinking about collective questions that will generate the kind of collaboration that's just really, really fun and inspiring, and leadership at the same time. Yeah. Get to that.
I will talk a little bit about the kind of overarching umbrella of how to citizen. My interpretation of how to citizen was how does a Duke student doing their daily life have a political, economic impact on this community in a way that they don't think about. So it's my kind of, that being my initial question, then went to talk to Black farmers who are in the area, and they spoke about, the way that you could truly help us is to buy Black. And I don't think that there's enough infrastructure for people to understand why historically that has not been the case, for people to make educated decisions based on knowing, that their dollar goes further in certain communities than it does. And then just the fact that the Duke dining contracts don't necessarily advantage. And obviously most undergraduate students are doing their dining on campus, considering how much, food you get and for how much money that is. But if you think about it, like the volume of those really high dollar contracts are not kind of skewed in the direction of really minority groups at all, but especially of Black people, and especially for Black rural people, Black farmers. So I was able to kind of interpret what does it mean to be a citizen and to participate in a democracy in a direction that was much more localized to my kind of day-to-day activities in a way that I felt was much more applicable to my community. And then about the podcast competition, I think it just highlights like the spirit of this fellowship is community and collaboration, and not in these like very lofty resume building ways, but like personally, one of the things that was really a challenge for me is how do I exist in a space with people who've been traditionally disadvantaged in a way that's not really intensely self-gratifying or glorifying. And the solution was just being there, being available, and letting people use me to say what they wanted and needed to say, and then acting on their wishes. And I think have uniquely supported me to that end. And I think all of our forthcoming projects, hopefully the podcast competition is going to be really cool, but I think all of our kind of forthcoming projects and our intentions for the future direction of the program also honor that like kind of authentic, intrinsically motivated spirit of working collectively towards an improved democracy rather than asserting that you are a defender of democracy and everything that you do.
So, I'll say. So questions, and if you've got any immediate questions or just like, or concerns, anything you want to ask.
Hey, Gunther, could I chime in a little bit?
Sure, of course, Tanner, yeah.
College side?
Yeah.
So just,
Here.
are
So
we recording?
Hmm?
Is this recording?
are we recording? Yes.
Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Yonda Rose and just so excited to represent the Polis team in our collaboration. So I feel like this is we're going to the third year of PEP, hard to believe, one of my favorite programs. And Olivia has been, in addition to being one of the PEP superstars, was also one of the Polis Directors Fellows. And so it's really helped us to build out programming that we've tried to connect the PEP Fellows with. So if you think about the landscape of our contemporary political arena, if you picture the people who are actually serving in political office and think about the broader American landscape, they don't match, they don't look the same. And that's a challenge for democracy. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking through is how can we empower anyone who's interested in serving in public service, and like Gunther said, from this broad collective community level of engaging in democracy and engaging as a citizen or citizening, but also to working in political institutions, because I feel like we have to have people who are really serious about democracy everywhere. So one of the things that Polis is hoping to do is to also supplement this amazing work that the PEP Fellows will do in the course with some additional opportunities to gain some skills that they can apply to other opportunities to engage in elite level politics. So if it's doing some candidate training, we've been connecting with an organization called Running Start, and they've done amazing work to diversify the political arena. And so they have some really interesting new initiatives that can actually train individuals to run for office, but can actually give you the skills that you can use to take to your community and train others as well. So if you're interested in perhaps connecting with some high school students, for example, and helping to foster their interest in running for office or serving in public leadership in some way, shape, or form, we're hoping to provide you with some access to those networks and skills as well. We're also thinking very seriously about ways to engage in political discussion. So short of running for office, short of engaging in activism, can you actually sit down and have an authentic, generative conversation with your family or members of your community or in your classroom? So we're hoping to bring in some organizations like Braver Angels. I think the Braver Angels, they used to be Better Angels, who can help us develop some skills so that engaging in politics isn't as scary. I think for a lot of people, it's just messy and nobody wants any part of it. So we're excited about this collaboration and helping to provide opportunities to gain the skills and any kind of networks or opportunities you need to engage in politics however you want, in the short term and the longer term. So just as Gunter said, if you can think of any kinds of workshops or skills that you'd be interested in gaining, please let us know, because we're really excited to connect with people on your behalf and bring them to campus. And we're excited about your interest in democracy and your interest in PEP. So thank you so much for letting me add.
Of course, and I'm sorry I didn't bring you up earlier, Professor Rose, right on. I also think to that end, we might do in the spring, workshops on how do you do a good, what is a good successful podcast, for example, or and there are ways to amplify the good voices that we have right here. And I should just quick shout out, there's a fabulous conference that Polis is organizing on gerrymandering right now. The new census is out, the maps are coming down, and it's an existential threat to our democracy, in fact. And so we're going to be hearing from the national leaders. It's an incredible program. Students are welcome to participate at every level, and we have a campus gerrymander right here. You know that already. And if you wait to vote on election day, you got to walk 45 minutes. It's kind of a bad deal. But at least it's only 45 minutes away. Some people have a much longer one. You can find it. So before I rant about politics and the lack of access, get revved up, because I do, it's my passion question since I was 18. Why is it so hard to vote? It's just wrong. We have this great democracy as an idea. The practice of it is just, we can do so much better. Not just naive, it's a simple question. That's all it is, access. So anyhow, questions that you got or concerns, anything you want to, yeah.
This might be a weird question because things have been virtual, but I was wondering if you could speak to like how the cohort is met outside of the class.
Nice, how does the cohort meet outside of the class? So the pandemic is, well, last spring we were in person. And so we were masked and all that. And I would say that the narrative work was the way people was really intense and built a trusting community within the cohort that was some of the hardest work in the class as the instructor last year, but also probably the most long lasting. I would say, yeah. So, but yeah, getting it. We are hoping to get together shortly, but yeah.
Yeah, also just on a personal side, we had a group chat. We put memes in the group chat whenever funny stuff happened in class. But so far as how actually we have met, like Gunther mentioned, we have a kind of forthcoming cohort reunion. And the class was in person, which was, we were very thankful to have in that this spring. I think we were all kind of collectively starved for meaningful social contact. So you actually become quite close with your cohort by virtue of just like the kind of work that you're doing. There's lots of like discussion of people's positionalities and their opinions and their backgrounds. And I think that is very cool.
But we could do more. I mean, I think part of it is what this does not have, which Seoul has, if you know the other program, that has a capstone class. Is by design, we did not want to do that because we didn't want to. There's so many different ways to do political engagement, and so many different. We kind of wanted the PEP fellows to be. This is the original, as I recall. We wanted them to be actually engaging their peers across the university beyond right away, and not just in one cohort, and that is happening. So I think that's. But how to build a community within a larger community is a great question. Yeah, so we're a work in progress. Sorry. Other questions? Great question.
I have a question in the chat.
Sure.
The website said something about PAC fellows interacting with the policy lab for Club Call 301. Could you go into more detail about that?
That's a Professor Rose question, and I think it's been, do you want to?
Sure, I can add, or do you want to, I think you probably know what I'm gonna say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, so it's an opportunity to do so, and it's not a requirement, is that correct?
Exactly right. But then we also have an opportunity. Sorry. So thank you so much for this question. So we, in 301, students have had the opportunity to work on memos for policymakers. So we reach out to members of the House and the Senate, mayors, city councils, county commissions, and ask if they're working on any issues where they could use some student research support. And students have been doing that in Club Call 301 here at Sanford. Now we have a Policy Lab Fellows program where students can actually work as RAs and do some of that memo writing work. So they could do a little or a lot working with us. So there is an opportunity for PEP Fellows to get involved in that way if they are interested. But again, it's not a formal requirement.
Great question. Other questions? Yeah.
So like a project, no.
So for the project itself, like, is it limited to the United States or does it go over broader?
Love it. No, it's not limited to the United States. I'm just going to go out on a limb. If, yeah, obviously democracy, whatever the heck that means, is a global challenge and opportunity. And so we need to think about that. We need to think of it. And the problems and the challenges to our democracy in the United States are obviously not solely exceptionally uniquely American. So yes, we're looking for that. We really would love to have that greater connectivity. So I'm excited to see what you're going to write. I hope if you apply. Other questions? Great question. Yeah.
Yours. I was going to ask, could you give some more examples of some of the research and community projects and groups that we'll work with?
So some more examples. So there are things that happened in the Democracy Lab, and then there are things that happened sort of after. So some things that happened in the very first iteration of Democracy Lab, before Olivia's group, we had two students who did research with the community partner, Melissa Price Crum, and they were interested in student access. They did research on how discriminatory not having an early vote site is on campus. And so they did a statewide study, and they continued over their summer with working with the same person they had met. Melissa Price Crum is a local statewide activist. And they basically ended up doing the research that came up with a proposition, which was no university with less than 4,000 students. If you have 4,000 students, you should have an early vote site. And that was the way to expand access. That insight and the research they did then became picked up by Jeff Jackson, who's a state congressperson from Charlotte. It's now in a bill, a democracy reform bill. It may not become law in this state, but the idea is hugely interesting and consequential. So that's one way to multiply their impact. Other students, their projects ended up, oh my gosh, Jimmy did a fantastic project on senior thesis on provisional ballots. Why do students cast so many of them? And why are they thrown out at 3 times higher rates than any other? Very similar to some of the BAS projects. Fantastic research. Really deep dive into the data. Other PET fellows just decided during the election, gosh, we need to do something now. So one of the issues last year was the student ballot, Spanish language ballots. So, and thinking of, I think there were 3 or 4 PET fellows from 2 years ago, teamed up with Anna, actually, and Axel and others who are recent grads at Duke, created a team of about 60 bilingual Duke students, created a script in Spanish and English and sent it out to thousands of Hispanic citizens whose ballots had been spoiled, but only got the ways to cure it in English. So there's a language barrier that was disfranchising thousands of people. I think y'all hit, what, 6 counties? I mean, it was an awesome work. Yeah, all over the state. And then there was a separate group, Hannah McKnight was involved with, this is how the work collaborated. Hannah is the founder of Durham Drives, which is not a student group, just providing rides to any voter who needed it across Durham County, 450 drivers. But then had about 50 or 60 left over who ended up going to Wake County because, long story, in Wake County, they only had addresses and no phone numbers. So all the spoiled absentee ballots that were Hispanic had to be reached. There was no way to do it. So it was absurd the lengths that these amazing students were going to. Hit every single spoiled absentee ballot in Wake County. I know that because I was driving. So several hundred people, and they had no idea. Absolutely no idea that their ballot they voted and they thought they were done. They didn't even know the cure, which is this opportunity, just was in English and they didn't speak English. So those were ambitious projects that came out of work, aspirations, and then like, oh, learning by doing. There's no way to come to that without having been fully involved in an access change. So that was some of those types of work. Others were much more academic. There's a great one this coming year on Daisy Lane's project on the 26th Amendment, and which was ratified by North Carolinians in 1971, half century later. We're looking at lots of problems to student voting. So she's studying how the issue was framed, why it was so successful, and also clearly what needs to be done now. So that's a really serious research project. That's a public policy thesis. So she was going to do it in history and in public policy, and that's too much. So Olivia, though, was doing 2. You were doing 2. Doing 1 or 2 now.
2.
Oh my God. So if that hat would be off to you.
One of those theses has to do with the kind of carrying the land theme over. Both of them are about land, but one of them has to do with some of the inclusions of land-based reparations proposals in the municipal reparations proposals that we've seen pop up. So I feel like you can kind of tell, to answer your question, because the point was to answer your question. They have been, like, the kind of format of what has been produced has like differed on the, like, for people who are more academically inclined, on the research side, on the community-based side. For one of our other fellows, there have been publications. One of our fellows published a really incredible op-ed about defending DACA. They've been ambitious. They've been like relatively smaller, cleaner, kind of deliverable final products. There's a lot of flexibility. Is what I would say.
And if you don't feel intimidated, I would say many people don't know what so the idea is to imagine a question and a project and then see what it leads you to. Think about, and when you do the application, you can do that. We are interested, as in the SOL application before, in the why. What motivates you? Why is this important to you, as well as what you think it might look like? And then our job at heart is to amplify your ability to do that, to collaborate. Oh my gosh, what a great opportunity to work with Professor Deandra Rose. Oh my gosh. So just like, seriously, what a fantastic new director of Hollis. So that's a great opportunity too, because we're not proprietary at all. We're not. We want the pet fellows to shine and to learn and teach us what the heck we should be doing. So yeah, please apply. You might have like 5 projects in mind. There's not a right one. There's one you are most excited about for now. Okay, and we're not going to go back and check. Like, I don't remember.
have no idea.
I don't even. I actually don't remember what you applied. I remember it being a really good statement. I don't remember what your project was. So okay, there we go. Yeah, we're over time. So any other questions? Good. Did you have a question? No. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And we hopefully will see you soon as pet fellows. So food over there.